a harbor town in Maine, 1807, a place where the scent of salt and pine filled the air, where life was measured by the tides, and where the rhythmic clang of a single ship's bell echoed across the water, marking the hours. This was a thriving community, built on hard work and the unwavering sea. But what if one night, without warning, the sea didn't just come in with the tide? What if it rose, swallowing the town whole, leaving nothing but a vast, silent bay, where homes and wharves once stood? And what if, years later, when all memory of the place had faded, a chilling sound could still be heard on the darkest nights, the faint, haunting toll of that very same bell, ringing from beneath the waves? This isn't just a tale of a forgotten disaster. It's a story about the impossible, a mystery that echoes from the deep, daring us to listen. If you're as fascinated by maritime mysteries and lost history as I am, you're in the right place. Go ahead and hit that like button to show your support. And subscribe so you don't miss out on more stories from the forgotten pages of the past. Also, sharing this with a friend who loves a good historical riddle would be a huge help. Thanks for being here. In the early 19th century, along the rocky coast of Maine, there was a place that felt more alive than any other. It was a small harbor town, nestled in a protected inlet, a bustling little community where life was a constant, tireless dance with the sea. The air tasted of salt and sawdust from the shipyards. The days were marked by the sound of gulls crying and the distant, rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer. This town wasn't just built by the sea. It was a part of it, with homes clinging to the bluffs and wharves reaching out into the water like arms embracing a loved one. The harbor was the town's heartbeat. It was where the fishing boats came in at dawn, their holds heavy with the night's catch. It was where the larger vessels, laden with lumber and furs, set off for Boston and beyond. Everyone had a place here, from the crusty old sailors to the children playing hide-and-seek among the stacks of lobster traps. They lived and breathed by the tides, an entire community woven into the very fabric of the coast. To them, the land was as solid and dependable as their own 2 feet, a foundation they never once questioned. But below their sturdy homes and thriving docks, the earth had secrets. The entire region was a complex mosaic of fault lines and fractured rock, a hidden, geological puzzle. For years, locals had noticed subtle oddities, a crack in the foundation of a house that seemed to get bigger overnight, or the occasional low rumble that shook the ground just enough to rattle the dishes. They dismissed these things as normal, just the quirks of a coastal existence. They were so focused on the horizon, on the ships coming in and out of the harbor, that they never thought to look down, to consider the ground on which their whole world rested. It's easy to look back now with the benefit of hindsight and see the signs. But for the people of this town, life was simply a routine of hard work and quiet joy. They were a community defined by their resilience against the ocean's storms, never once imagining that the real storm wouldn't come from the sea, but from the land beneath their feet. They didn't know that the very thing that protected their harbor was also its greatest vulnerability. And soon, in a way they could never have prepared for, that truth would come crashing down on them. The town's connection to the sea ran deeper than just commerce. It was in their blood. Every family had a story, a father or a brother who was a fisherman, a shipbuilder, or a sea captain. The children were taught to read the waves before they could read a book. Their lives were a symphony of sorts, a constant give and take with the unpredictable ocean, a relationship they understood and respected. It was a life of simple pleasures and hard-earned security. At the very heart of this community, moored right in the center of the harbor, was a vessel that was more than just a ship. It was the Vigilant, a sturdy merchant brig, known for its reliability and its distinctive deep-toned bell. That bell wasn't just for telling time or warning a fog. Its resonant sound became the town's heartbeat, a comfortingly constant presence in the daily rhythm of their lives, a sound that everyone depended on. On the eve of the disaster, everything seemed normal. The ships were swaying gently at their moorings, the last of the fishermen were heading home, and the town was settling into a peaceful night. No one noticed the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the sea level. No one felt the soft groan of the earth beneath them. The people of the town simply went to sleep, their faith in the ground below them as strong as their faith in the sunrise. They had no idea that their relationship with the land was about to change, in a way that would rewrite their history forever. That evening, the harbor was a picture of perfect tranquility. The moon cast a silver path on the water, and the fishing boats bobbed gently at their moorings. Captain Josiah, the master of the Vigilant, went about his nightly routine, checking the ropes and giving his ship's bell a final soft polish. It was a clear, star-filled night, the kind that promised another beautiful day. No one heard the whisper of the earth groaning, the sound of ancient rocks slowly, imperceptibly shifting. The deep slumber of the town was a testament to their unwavering trust in the ground beneath them. The sea, a thing of constant motion and change, was their only known adversary. They had weathered countless storms, and their whole existence was a dance with its rhythms. But this was something different entirely. The threat wasn't in the waves, but in the land they considered home. And as the town slept, the delicate balance that had held them in place for generations was beginning to unravel. They didn't hear it, but a deep tectonic sigh was escaping from the earth below. The land, saturated with water and built on a foundation of unstable glacial sediment, was beginning its final, slow descent. In a matter of hours, this thriving, beautiful town would cease to exist above the waves, and a legacy of echoes would begin to fill the silence. What could possibly have caused a disaster of such a terrifying and unprecedented scale? The disaster didn't announce itself with the roar of a storm or the rumble of an earthquake. Instead, it began with a sound that was far more sinister, a low, grinding moan that seemed to come from the very bones of the earth. It started in the dead of night, a sound so unnatural it woke people from their deepest sleep. It was followed by a sharp, violent shudder, as if the entire town was being shaken by a giant, unseen hand. Panic spread like a contagion. People stumbled out of bed and into the darkness, their hearts pounding in their chests. They saw cracks splintering across their walls and floors, heard the horrifying creak of timbers giving way. But that was just the beginning. The low groan from the ground intensified, and then, with a sound like 1,000 shipwrecks at once, the land itself began to give way. The harbor, the very foundation of their existence, was sinking. The sea, a once familiar friend, became their greatest enemy. The water didn't just rise, it surged in to fill the void, rushing with an unstoppable force into streets and homes. Wharves twisted and splintered. The great heavy boats moored in the harbor were suddenly caught in a whirlpool, slammed against each other and against the collapsing land. A wall of seawater, propelled by the sinking earth, rushed into the town, swallowing everything in its path. There was no time to think, no time to reason. It was pure, primal survival. People scrambled onto rooftops, climbed trees, anything to get above the rapidly rising water. The beautiful, bustling harbor they had known for generations was vanishing before their eyes, replaced by a churning, violent maelstrom of wreckage and despair. And as the waters rose, they carried with them the heartbreaking sound of an entire town, gasping for its last breath. The event was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. This wasn't a flood, it was a subsidence. The earth itself was collapsing, sinking down into a void. It happened in a matter of minutes. The homes once so solid on their foundations slid off into the churning abyss. Windows shattered, roofs collapsed, and the sound of splintering wood and groaning metal was swallowed by the roar of the sea rushing in to claim its new territory. It was as if the town had been erased from the face of the earth, as if it had never been there at all. Those who managed to escape to the higher ground of the nearby hills could only watch in horrified silence. They saw the flickering lights of their homes disappear one by one, swallowed by the rising tide. The once bustling harbor, a place of constant motion and life, was now a violent, churning cauldron. They saw ships, caught in the whirlpool, smashed against the submerged wreckage of wharves. It was a terrifying, surreal sight, a peaceful harbor transformed into a watery grave in a single, agonizing night. As the roar of the water began to subside, a new, far more chilling silence took its place. It was a silence filled with the desperate cries of those who had escaped and the eerie groan of a dying town. The air, once filled with the scent of salt and pine, now held the grim smell of loss. And at the center of the bay, a vast, dark expanse of water now lay where a vibrant town had been just hours before. But what became of the ships and the men who were still aboard them, lost in the heart of this drowned harbor? As the sun began to rise, it cast its light on a sight that no one would ever forget. The harbor town was gone. In its place was a vast, deep bay, its surface littered with the wreckage of homes and ships. A few rooftops bobbed like lonely buoys in the water, the last visible remnants of a life that was. The sound of waves lapping against the shore was all that remained, a cold and relentless reminder of the sea's final victory. The air hung heavy with a silence that screamed louder than any noise. The survivors, huddled on the bluffs, stood in disbelief. They were a community of fishermen, and they knew the sea. They knew its fury and its beauty. But this was something else. This was the earth itself betraying them, pulling their world down into the silent depths. It wasn't a storm they could have weathered, or a wave they could have outrun. It was a disaster that had no name, no precedent. And what of the ships that had been moored in the harbor? The smaller boats had been splintered into wreckage, but the larger vessels, weighed down and trapped by the sinking land, were now submerged. The town's heart, the very reason for its existence, was now a watery tomb, its secrets lost beneath the waves. But a legend was about to be born, one that would defy all logic and all reason, centered around a particular ship and the bell that was its soul. Every town has its heroes. For this community, one of them wasn't a man or a woman, but a ship. The Vigilant, a sturdy merchant brig, was the pride of the harbor. Built in the town's own shipyard, she was a vessel of solid oak and unwavering purpose, a workhorse that brought prosperity with every voyage. She represented not just commerce, but the town's spirit of resilience, its faith in the sea and in itself. She was a constant presence, a familiar silhouette against the Maine coastline. At the helm of the Vigilant was Captain Josiah, a man as steady and reliable as his ship. He was a pillar of the community, a master mariner who knew every rock and reef in the bay. But his greatest point of pride wasn't the ship itself, but the bronze bell mounted on its deck. Cast from a unique alloy, it had a sound unlike any other deep, resonant toll that carried far and wide, a voice all its own. That bell wasn't just an object, it was the town's timepiece. It marked the changing of the watches, the beginning of a new day, and the return of a ship. Its chime was a comfort to the families waiting on shore, a familiar song in the harbor's constant symphony of sounds. The town lived its life by the bell of the vigilant, never once imagining that a sound so full of life would one day become an echo of a ghost. Every evening, without fail, Captain Josiah would climb on deck and give the bell one final, deliberate ring just before turning in. It was a signal to the town, a quiet promise that the vigilant was safe at anchor, a silent farewell to the day. This simple ritual was a source of great comfort to the townsfolk. Its low, clear toll was a sound that meant all was well in their world. That final night, the sound was no different. The bell rang out just as it always had, a peaceful, reassuring chime that echoed across the water and into the town. It was a sound full of life and purpose, a sound of a world in order. No one could have known that this would be the last time they heard its full, clear voice from above the waves. The ship, the bell, and Captain Josiah were all a part of the town's very soul. And on that fateful night, as the land began to groan and the sea began to rise, the vigilant was still tied to its mooring, its bell silent and ready to toll the hour, never once anticipating that the ocean would become its final home. But what happens to the heart of a town when it is submerged beneath the waves? And could a bell, once a symbol of life, become a phantom voice of the dead? The ship and its bell were at the center of the harbor, a silent sentry in a peaceful night. But as the land gave way, the vigilant was not spared. Caught in the sudden, violent current of the sinking earth, she was no longer a vessel on water, but an object in a terrifying whirlpool of mud, rock, and debris. The ship, which had weathered 100 storms, was now helpless against the very ground it had been born from. Her oaken hull groaned in protest as the pressure mounted. Her rigging snapped like threads. She was pulled down with an unstoppable force, a silent victim of a disaster she couldn't outrun. And in her final moments, as she went under, a piece of the collapsing dock struck her bell, not with a clean, clear toll, but with a choked, frantic clang, a muffled, gurgling sound that was swallowed by the churning water. It was the sound of a living thing dying, and it was the last anyone saw or heard of the vigilant. The great ship and its bell were now a part of the drowned harbor, a permanent resident of the silent deep. But for the people watching from the bluffs, the mystery was just beginning. The memory of that muffled final clang would remain with them forever, a terrifying sound that would soon be eclipsed by something far more chilling and far more inexplicable. What could possibly echo from a place that no longer existed above the waves? In the days that followed the disaster, a deep and mournful silence fell over the coastline. The survivors were in a state of shock, their lives uprooted, their entire community vanished. All that remained was a new, still bay where their harbor once thrived, a vast watery tomb that held the memories and the secrets of the town that was. The loss was a pain too profound for words, a void that mirrored the one now in the earth. But then, one night, a sound broke the silence. A young fisherman, who had lost his family in the sinking and was keeping a lonely vigil on the bluffs, swore he heard it. Faint, ghostly, and almost swallowed by the sound of the wind. It was the sound of a bell. It was the distinct, deep tone of the vigilance bell. He wasn't the only one. Others, too, began to hear it, a soft, single toll that seemed to rise from the depths of the bay, a chilling echo that had no logical explanation. A bell, submerged beneath 100 feet of water and muck, should be silent forever. The immense pressure and density of the water should render its sound inert. Yet, people were hearing it. The sound wasn't a loud, clear chime, but a muffled, haunting toll that seemed to carry with it the sorrow of the town. It was the sound of a ghost, a mournful whisper from the drowned harbor, and it began to drive the survivors mad. As the days turned into weeks, the reports of the bell's ringing became more frequent and consistent. It was heard not just by the direct survivors, but by sailors on passing ships, and even by residents of neighboring towns. The legend began to spread, a chilling story of a drowned harbor and a ghost ship that refused to be silenced. People from all over the region came to the bluffs, hoping to catch a glimpse of the phenomenon, their morbid curiosity a testament to the power of the inexplicable. But for the people who had lost everything, the bell was no mere ghost story. It was a constant, agonizing reminder of their trauma. It was the voice of their drowned world, a sound that seemed to mock their grief. Some found it a source of torment, a cruel trick of a universe that had already taken so much. Others, in a strange twist of human psychology, found a morbid comfort in it. It was a sign that the heart of their town, the vigilant and its bell, hadn't been completely silenced. It was as if the town itself was refusing to be forgotten. The emotional toll was immense. How do you move on from a disaster when its memory literally rings from the depths? How do you rebuild your life when the symbol of your loss is a constant, haunting presence? The mystery of the bell was no longer just a curiosity. It was a deeply personal and deeply painful part of the survivors' new reality. The need for an explanation became an obsession, a desperate search for reason in a world that had become utterly senseless. The legend of the ringing bell became a dark and powerful part of the region's folklore. It was no longer just the story of a drowned harbor, it was the story of a ghost that refused to be silent. The town's spirit, its very soul, was said to be trapped beneath the waves, ringing a mournful toll that only the living could hear. This haunting sound became a constant reminder that their loss was not just a historical event, but a living, breathing part of their reality. The bell wasn't just a physical object lost to the sea, it was a symbol of the town's undying memory. It represented a past that refused to be forgotten, a cry from a world that had vanished in a night. It was an impossible riddle, a mystery that defied all logic and reason. And as the legend grew, so did the desire for answers. People couldn't shake the question, what was causing the sound? The question wasn't just a matter of curiosity, it was a desperate need to find a logical explanation for an unexplainable tragedy. Was it a trick of the waves? Was it a natural phenomenon that had never been documented? Or was it something far more mysterious, a genuine echo from the dead? The time had come for someone to brave the depths and try to find the truth behind the sound. As the legend of the bell grew, so did the number of people seeking an answer. A new kind of visitor began to arrive at the bay, not just the morbidly curious, but scholars, geologists, and amateur scientists. They came armed with theories, convinced there had to be a natural, logical explanation for a sound that defied all reason. Could it be a vent in the seabed? A strange acoustic echo from the surrounding cliffs? The desperate need for a solution turned the drowned harbor from a place of grief into a puzzle to be solved. The first theories were all about the waves. Perhaps the unique shape of the newly formed bay was creating a resonance, a low hum that, to a grieving mind, sounded like a bell. Others proposed that air trapped in the submerged houses was being forced out by the immense water pressure, creating a strange whistling sound. Each theory was more complex than the last, an intellectual effort to explain a phenomenon that felt so deeply personal to those who had lived it. But the theories, no matter how elegant, felt hollow. They didn't account for the distinct, deep toll of a bell, a sound that everyone in the town had known their entire lives. The most logical explanation was also the most dangerous to confirm, that the sound was somehow, impossibly, coming from the bell itself. The only way to know for sure was to go down there, to brave a watery grave that no one had dared to enter. The logical next step, of course, was to send divers down to investigate, but this was no easy task. The drowned harbor was a treacherous place, a watery grave of submerged homes, sharp wreckage, and thick soupy mud. It was a dark, claustrophobic environment that held the secrets of an entire vanished town. The divers who first braved its depths were not just on a mission, they were entering a ghost town beneath the waves, a world swallowed whole by the sea. They navigated twisted streets and glided past the gaping windows of homes where families had once lived. The sight was surreal and horrifying, a testament to the sudden violence of the disaster. And there, buried in the silt, entangled with seaweed, they found it. The Vigilant, its hull, still mostly intact, stood upright on the seabed, a silent sentinel in the underwater darkness. And on its deck, just as it was the bell. But the bell was silent. The clapper, wedged in place by debris, was completely unable to strike the bronze. There was no way it could have produced the sounds people were hearing. The logical explanation was now gone. The bell, the source of the legend, was physically incapable of making a sound. The divers surfaced with more questions than answers. If the bell wasn't ringing, what, or who, was? The mystery had just deepened, pushing the story back into the realm of the impossible. The divers' report was a shock. If the bell was silent, what was the source of the haunting toll? The investigators had to rethink everything. The answer, they eventually theorized, lay not in the bell's ability to ring, but in the sound's journey through the drowned landscape. The town itself was a giant, submerged soundscape, a labyrinth of waterlogged wood and collapsed rock. As deep-sea currents shifted and settled the debris, pockets of air trapped within the sunken buildings would occasionally be released. These pockets of air, upon escaping, would create a low, muffled sound. The unique geology of the submerged land, combined with the dense medium of the water, acted like a giant echo chamber. It took this simple sound and, as if by a ghostly magic trick, resonated it at a frequency that mimicked the distinct, low toll of the Vigilance bell. The sound was real, a genuine echo of the disaster, but it wasn't the bell itself ringing. For the survivors, this explanation would have been a bitter comfort. The voice wasn't a ghostly sign from their dead. It was a random act of geology, but the sound they heard was no less real, no less a poignant reminder of their loss. It was a physical echo of a tragic past, a sound that would become the cornerstone of a legend far more powerful than any simple scientific explanation.
The scientific explanation for the bell's ringing was, in a way, just another chapter in the story. It provided a logical answer for a phenomenon that had terrified and mesmerized the community for decades. But the truth is, the legend never really faded. Why would it? For the people who had lost their homes and their loved ones in a single night, the scientific explanation was cold comfort. They had needed a story, a narrative that gave meaning to their suffering, and the legend of the bell delivered. The bell became a symbol of the town's refusal to be forgotten. Its ghostly toll wasn't a random geological echo. It was the voice of a community that had been swallowed by the earth, a cry from the past that demanded to be heard. The legend provided a beautiful, tragic metaphor for their grief. They could imagine the heart of their town, the vigilant, standing sentinel beneath the waves, still ringing its bell in defiance of its watery grave. This is the power of folklore. It's the human way of making sense of the senseless. It takes the chaos of a natural disaster and weaves it into a powerful, enduring tale. For the survivors, the bell's ringing was an echo of a ghost, not because it was haunted, but because they needed it to be. They needed a symbol of their loss that was as permanent and as profound as the disaster itself. But what is the ultimate conclusion of this powerful story? Ultimately, the story of the drowned harbor is not just about a geological disaster or a scientific mystery. It's about the human heart and its profound need to remember and to find meaning. The bell's ringing was an echo of a ghost, not because the place was haunted, but because the survivors' grief was. The legend they created was a way for them to process their collective trauma, to give a voice to the silent emptiness where their town once stood. The legacy of the bell's echoes is that it keeps the memory of the town alive. It is a constant, a reminder that the people who lived there and the lives they built mattered. The story is a monument in itself, a tale passed down through generations that ensures that the harbor, though physically gone, will never truly be forgotten. The echoes of that bell became a part of the Maine coastline's identity, a permanent part of its folklore. But as with all great stories, this one has a final lesson. It asks us to consider our own relationship with the past and our own need for stories that explain the unexplainable. It's a story about the fine line between history and legend, science and superstition, and the simple truth that sometimes the most profound answers aren't in what happened, but in how we remember it. The story of the drowned harbor and the ship that rang its bell beneath the waves is, at its heart, a story about the fragile nature of our world. It is a somber tale about how quickly everything we hold dear can be swept away by forces beyond our control. But it is also a beautiful testament to the resilience of human memory. It shows us that even when a town is erased from the map, its story, its spirit, can still echo from the deep, refusing to be silenced. The bell's haunting toll was a message from the past, a constant reminder that something profound was lost. But the legend that grew around it was a human invention, a way to make sense of the chaos and to find a kind of hope in the face of despair. It is a story that has endured not because of its scientific accuracy, but because it speaks to a fundamental human truth: that we need our ghosts, our myths, and our legends to help us navigate the parts of life that defy all explanation. So, the next time you hear a strange sound on a dark night, or stand by a quiet shoreline, take a moment to listen. It might just be the wind, or the waves. Or it might be an echo from a story long past. A sound from the deep, reminding you that history is not just in books, but in the legends we tell and the memories we keep alive.